Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so I caught this episode of NewsNight with Abby Phillip, although she wasn't there for this one. She was being filled in for, but this was an episode that had Cameron Kasky, and so that's why it caught my attention, because he was debating with Scott Jennings about the Epstein files and other stuff. And Cameron Kasky was running for Congress in New York, but now he's not. He dropped out. I actually just learned this after watching this clip. He was a vociferous advocate for Israel and for Palestine and Palestinian rights. And he said after visiting the West Bank that his main priority should be trying to stop settler violence in the West Bank. So all the power to him on that. It's a little disappointing because he was frankly striking a pretty pro-human rights, pro-Palestine tone with his campaign, as well as tying that in with a more left-wing affordability agenda. But anyway, so this conversation turned into more of just Scott Jennings kind of getting excoriated over the Epstein stuff, taking his usual flippant piece of shit attitude about it and kind of getting smacked around about it a little bit, although this guy is kind of impervious to that. He just doesn't seem to have any shame or anything like that. Both him and the other conservative on this panel are just hacks, essentially, and they just trot out this MAGA sycophancy, with no shame at all. And that's why this CNN program is kind of noxious, because on the sort of center left side of these conversations, you have a little bit of interesting conversation happening, and then it's fair to want to have some cross the aisle conversation, but these people that they have on the right are just such sycophants and so extreme in their advocacy for Trump, which really just leads to them taking pretty absurd positions. But that's just the nature of American politics at this point. So here's a clip where we have Cameron Kasky immediately pivoting from a conversation about Greenland, making it about the Epstein files, and Scott Jennings taking issue with that, and leading to this weird moment where he basically calls out the substitute for Abby Phillips to fact check Cameron Kasky on that. And then that leads into some other conversation about Epstein later with this lady Leigh McGowan. So I'll get to that.
Well, Trump is being very transparent about what he wants here, and he did the same in Venezuela. In Venezuela, he said this was about oil, and with Greenland, he's saying this is a personal grievance for which I am threatening military action. And he's basically playing risk because people hurt his feelings, or people ostensibly hurt his feelings. So I am appreciative that the president is being transparent about this. I would love it if he was more transparent about the human sex trafficking network that he was a part of, but you can't win them all.
Cameron's grateful that the president is being transparent about the Nobel Peace Prize and his desires for Greenland. Scott, what do you think about that?
You gonna let that sit? Are we gonna claim here on CNN that the president is part of a global sex trafficking ring, or?
Well,
I mean,
we're gonna talk about the Epstein files. Scott, I will do the fact checking as we go along here. Repeat what you said about the global sex trafficking ring.
That Donald Trump was provably very involved with it.
Okay, we'll get to that later. I mean, Donald Trump has never been charged with any crimes in relation to Jeffrey Epstein. But
let's be adults here.
We'll talk about Epstein
Let's be
files
serious.
later. Satisfied? Now answer the question about Greenland. The law, Scott says, that the Justice Department shall release all the Epstein files, not can if it wants to or gets around to it.
Yeah, what's the punishment if they don't?
That's a great point. I mean, that's a problem.
There is none. So here's the deal. I think they should release it. I think they should follow the law. I also have no idea how long it takes to prepare this many documents for this kind of release. Counselor may have some thoughts on that, but they should follow the law, but let's not get our knickers in a twist here.
Let's not get our knickers in a twist over child rape. Why are you talking like that? It's insane. It's insane. The Epstein files is insane? A multinational, multi-generational child and woman sex trafficking ring. So your attitude right now, you're sort of like, well, shucks, devil begun, is just horrifying to me. Every woman in the world that is watching this Why are you acting like you have no idea what's happening here? Scott, this is...
He asked me a question about following the law.
Yes, and what
I
I'm
said
saying
they should
to you
follow
is
the
your
law.
attitude. Yes, and they're not following the law. They're 30 days late on following law, and they didn't explain why they redacted the first things in the first place, which they were also supposed to do.
I know.
Listen,
you
at
have
this
a strong
point, this is
opinion
not...
about it, and
I have a strong
respect
opinion
that.
about it because it is a
But I think they should-
disgusting
I think they should
policy
do it as
that they are
fast as
doing
they
this.
can.
They are hiding it. It is not the behavior of innocent people, and everything that is in these files it could bring an entire house down. And if it has to, it has to. If it brings down Democrats, bring them down. If it brings down Republicans, bring them down. If it brings down princes, world leaders, Hollywood people, bring them down. But what it feels like right now is that there's a giant cabal of people that do not have to listen to the law, do not have to oppose the law, and they were supposed to do something, then they didn't do something, and now they're trying to have a new law that says we
this
don't even
lady,
have to.
Leigh McGowan, her name is Politics Girl. That's her tag. The only thing I know about her, she seems familiar, but I only know her because I know that her SEO is really good, because one time I was trying to find somebody else, some other smaller account, and all I could find was this Politics Girl account. I tried so many different versions of it, and she just kept coming up. So there's definitely a concerted effort behind this lady, and she seems to be pretty much on the liberal side of things, but a strong voice for that, and occupying a similar space to like Jennifer Welch, where, you know, adopting the pretty standard aesthetic of liberalism, of like a liberal mom or whatever, but being able to speak pretty harshly and pretty frankly at the same time. So it's appreciated. It's an appreciated energy. I think that it's a useful energy on shows like this, because shows like this are so skewed to the right because of the diligent sycophancy of people like Scott Jennings and this other guy. I can't remember what his name is. And so it is useful to have people on the left side of that conversation that are both able to shout these guys down, which is a necessary technique in this type of environment, but also are able to cut through the kind of bullshit of American politics and, you know, stop with the endless talking points and this sort of moralizing that they do over like the law and the this and the that. Just speaking frankly about what American life should be like and what Americans should and shouldn't have to deal with. And you get that both from this stuff about Epstein and saying how absurd it is that the president is covering this up, and we all know that there's some association there, and they just keep covering it up more and more, which makes it kind of undeniable that there's some kind of connection there. But then obviously Scott Jennings, not only is he going to deny that there's a direct connection, but he takes this attitude of, well, what are they going to do if he doesn't release it anyway? So I mean, that type of just absolute loyalty to the Trump administration and just general Republican and really pedophilic power structure as it exists is genuinely pretty shocking. And Cameron Kasky says something about that later, where he says, you know, I know that you just have to do this shocking thing. You have to keep getting more shocking every week in order for people to keep turning in. And I think that that's true. Somebody said the same thing about Nick Fuentes, that it just turns into this sort of like endlessly self-flagellating absurdity because they have to keep entertaining their audience by becoming more extreme. And it's a formula that has worked for the entire Trump movement, frankly, except you start getting into this weird territory where Trump is saying that he wants to take Greenland because he didn't win the Nobel Prize, and all this Epstein stuff, which everybody knows is horrible, and now they're officially breaking the law significantly with the amount of stuff that they have and haven't released. And you still have these guys like Scott Jennings and the other hacks that they have on there to defend it. And what you don't see as much on the right is the salt of the earth portion of Trump's base coming out to defend some of this stuff. You still have people out there that support him, but really when it comes to the most potent parts of his support base, they are not the ones who are trotting out these defenses of Epstein and the war stuff like Greenland. Venezuela, a little bit more. You hear some of that sort of machismo, people who like that America is doing something like that, not only viciously, but also seemingly somewhat efficiently. That does appeal to some people. But this Greenland stuff, I think, is a little bit harder to swallow. Some people are starting to buy the justification. And really, the Epstein stuff, it seems like most people don't want to get behind it. So you need corporate hacks like this. You need a guy like Scott Jennings who's virtually willing to say anything, worked in the Bush administration during the Iraq War and was part of that whole propaganda structure. So ultimately, that's just what that guy does. And he's affiliated with the CNN corporate structure. And that's why he's there. And I've said before, contract or no contract, if they wanted to fire this guy, they could. If they wanted to get rid of him or phase him out, they could. They clearly like that he's there. They like that somebody's pushing this specific line on that slot of the news network. And Cameron Kasky, unfortunately, while he gets some good digs in here, I don't think he did the best job at going at this, because I always say when I criticize these roundtables is that you got to go at these guys hard. You got to be kind of vicious about it. You certainly have to talk over them, and you got to speak in a way that cuts through their bullshit moralizing. And so you see a little bit more of that with the Leigh McGowan lady. I think she had a great performance here, frankly. And here's the next part where they're talking about the ICE protests in Minnesota. They actually got a lot into this, talking about Renee Nicole Good being shot, as well as this protest that happened inside of a church because the pastor at the church is accused of working with ICE. And so there was a protest where a bunch of people kind of went into the church, started chanting, started shouting. A bunch of people left the church, essentially went home, and it was a big dramatic scene. And so now that is being reflected upon negatively on these protesters. They shouldn't have done that. That was too far. They had no right to do that. Personally, I don't agree with that, honestly, but we'll get to that in a second. So here's a clip of these hacks using this protest as a means of defending ICE's actions in Minnesota, and then I'll get into some more updates about what's going on there.
Do you think it's a productive protest, Cameron, what they did?
I personally would not protest horrific, evil activity in somebody's church. That's not how I would go about the matter. I personally understand why so many people feel moved to insert themselves into certain spaces, because these are horrific times, and horrific times call for unprecedented actions. But that is simply not how I would choose to conduct myself in that matter.
John, can I make a point? You know, I think it's very interesting, because I totally disagree. Because of what a pastor does for a living, or what they're involved in politically, gives no one the right. There was a child in that video who was sitting in their father's arms, shaking, confused, trying to figure out what's going on when these people burst into this church. And Leigh, what I would say is people have a First Amendment right and the ability to go and protest against ICE. If they don't like ICE, be my guest, go protest. But those people in that church, I would say and, not but, those people in that church absolutely have a First Amendment right to gather and worship the God of their choosing. And I'll say a point here is, it is actually Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., with the day that we recognize his contribution to the country today. His mother in 1974 was shot and killed in a church because of political violence, because the KKK wanted to insert their political will over a community. This is remarkably similar to that. I remember my great-grandfather telling me stories about church bombings in the South. Remarkably similar to that. Everyone at this table should have
So the protest is similar to the person getting shot.
Let me finish, please. Everyone at this table, please, should have absolutely no issue saying that this was wrong. It was reprehensible behavior, and this is not the appropriate way that we address our grievances in this country.
So which innocent people are and are not allowed to get shot as far as you're concerned?
That's not what I'm talking about. People have a right in this country, regardless of what your political convictions are, to worship freely and safely, and no one should watch a child on camera like what we saw, trembling in their father's arms because of your political convictions. ICE does
to children
and their
families.
Your political convictions do not overstep someone's ability to worship safely
and
securely.
Stop making it about worship.
Did I call that into question?
I'm sorry, guys. I respect you, but there's no but. There's no but.
There's a little bit of a
stop
different issue.
All right, so you hear this really depraved move that this guy is making here, and Scott Jennings does the same thing at a different point in this debate, where he's comparing essentially these people, this pastor and these people in this church, to like Martin Luther King and him being assassinated. And as Cameron Kasky tries to point out there, that's pretty sick to do that over the woman who was shot, right? Comparing the people protesting on behalf of the woman who got shot, comparing them essentially to the people who shot Martin Luther King, is obviously just nakedly political. Doesn't even have to make sense. What these conservatives say doesn't have to make sense at all. It just has to advance their argument. And I think that as long as environments like this are taking up space, and it's where, left liberals and in some rare cases leftists are going to make their case, that should be taken note of. That this is really about moving the goalpost, and it's really about making an emotional argument that then forces your opponent to rationalize it in some way. Because if you can assert that what this is about, this church protest, is the fact that people have the right to practice their religion freely. That's true. But what are we talking about? The First Amendment protects people from the government coming in and interrupting and determining who they can and can't organize for or worship. That has nothing to do with the protest. And so they have a sort of extended discussion here about whether it's legal what they did in protesting this church because it was a disruption of a religious service. I don't really know about that. One lady on the panel seems to think that it is like something that they could be charged for. So we'll see if that happens. I honestly doubt it. There might be some kind of like legal proceedings or like threats that are made. But ultimately, I think this is pretty small potatoes. And frankly, when it comes to a small community like this, I think this is totally valid because the pastor is credibly accused of working with ICE in this case. And unless it comes out that that's not true, I think this is a perfectly valid thing to do. It is disruptive and it is fraying in the community. However, I think desperate times call for desperate measures. And I think that, first of all, this pastor deserves to have his service interrupted if he is working with ICE. And these people that are going to this service deserve to know that that pastor is working with ICE. Some of them might not come back to that church because of it. A lot of them probably like it or don't mind that. But there's at least a few, I would imagine, that didn't know that and would like to know that, because ultimately what it means to be working with ICE in this context is that you are contributing to tearing apart the community. And so you shouldn't be able to do that as a pastor, a leader in the community, supposedly, without the risk that people, enraged people in your community, are going to come and disrupt your service, especially because they don't have recourse when it comes to the federal government. They don't have recourse when it comes to stopping these agents from doing what they do. When they seek accountability from these agents and try to document what they're doing, they're risking being shot in the face. And so what else are you going to do but go into a church, which is a place of public gathering, and demand answers, demand accountability from that pastor? The reality is of a tactic like this is that a lot of the people that are in that church are going to perceive that as very hostile from the end of the protesters, and that very well could push them away from that cause. But ultimately, I'm not as worried about those church goers as much as I'm worried about the practice of resisting what that pastor is doing and getting away with, and the act of disrupting that service and not allowing him to continue upholding himself as a positive member of the community, I think in and of itself is a good thing, even if it's a little bit ugly and yes, a little bit extreme. But it's that type of disruption that actually makes a difference in cases like this. And so in Minneapolis, the AFL-CIO is calling for a general strike on Friday. So this was the 23rd, the day of general action that they had called for a few days ago, has now morphed into a general strike, which has been called for by the unions. So that's an escalation of what exactly type of action is being called for on that day, and it's starting to pick up some momentum. So something is going to happen on the 23rd. Whether it's going to be a massive strike that really picks up momentum, or it's going to be something that kind of peters out because they aren't able to sustain, we'll find out. But there's enough momentum behind it at this point that some kind of walkout or something is going to take place on the 23rd, and hopefully the unions being involved means that this is going to begin a much larger process of other unions getting involved throughout the country, which it does seem like there's some rumblings there. And ultimately this is the path. And also, if you don't want to see things get bad in terms of protesting, a strike is a better way to go, because a strike is giving these members of the community a way to actually make a dent in this problem. And the reason you're seeing their actions become increasingly extreme and dire is because they are lashing out for ways to actually make a difference in this situation. The reality is that ICE in Minnesota just needs to be stopped. They need to get out. This needs to be stopped nationwide, period. And so whatever means are possible to be mustered to make that happen, it needs to happen. And the reactionaries, of course, are going to get in the way, and they're going to make their moralistic arguments. People have the right to worship in church, and ICE agents should be able to carry out the law and go about their jobs. Fuck them, and if anything, do the same thing back. People have the right to protest. People have the right to strike in this country, period. Let them do the rationalizing, let them do the explaining, and ultimately a strike and making that type of economic impact is exactly what's going to allow the conversation to move a little bit more towards the left and a little bit more towards labor and away from some of these reactionary talking points. Because, like I said, the middle ground of Trump's base is evaporating a little bit. And so while it may provoke the reactionaries a little bit to do things like a strike, ultimately that is the way to take back the voice of the working class in this country and actually do something about this federal overreach.
Me too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.